The scent of brewed coffee and warm leather filled the first-class cabin of Apex Air Flight 712, a sanctuary of privilege flying 7 miles above the earth. For 10-year-old Kai Merrick, Seat 2A was more than just a comfortable chair. It was a window to his dreams of flight. He clutched a new sketchbook, its pages waiting to be filled with the futuristic jets he imagined. But a shadow fell over his page, sharp and unwelcome. It wasn't turbulence. It was the cold, appraising glare of senior flight attendant Brenda Haskins. In her eyes, the boy's ticket was a typo. His presence an error she was about to correct, an act of prejudice that would create a shockwave felt from the hushed cabin to the highest floors of global aviation. She had no idea the boy's father was about to ground more than just her career. He was about to ground the entire airline. The journey had been planned for months, a much-needed bridge between a grueling quarter for Robert Merrick and the start of his son's summer vacation. It was a boys' trip, a cross-country journey from New York to Los Angeles. For Kai, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the flight itself. The boy was an aviation prodigy in the making. His bedroom wasn't plastered with posters of athletes or movie stars, but with detailed schematics of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner and the Airbus A350. He could tell you the difference in thrust between a General Electric GEnx engine and a Rolls-Royce Trent 1000. For his 10th birthday, Robert hadn't bought him a video game console. He'd bought him a professional-grade flight simulator rig that took up a corner of their study. This trip was special. Robert had cashed in a mountain of loyalty points to secure 2 first-class seats, 2A and 2B, on Apex Air's flagship transcontinental route. He wanted Kai to experience the pinnacle of commercial flight, to see the flight deck, to feel the quiet hum of the engines from the front of the plane. At the John F. Kennedy International Airport flagship lounge, Robert's phone buzzed incessantly. A last-minute crisis with a European avionics supplier required his immediate attention. He looked at Kai, who was happily sketching in his notebook, a glass of orange juice beside him. "Hey, champ," Robert said, ruffling his son's hair. "I have to take this. It's important. Boarding is about to start. Do you think you can head to the gate and get on board by yourself? I'll be right behind you. I promise. Our seats are 2A and 2B. Kai's eyes lit up. Boarding alone felt like a grown-up mission. "Yeah, Dad, I can do it." "Great. Show them your boarding pass, find your seat, and just settle in. I'll be there before you can finish drawing a new wing design." Robert gave him a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder and turned away, his voice dropping into the serious, commanding tone of a CEO as he answered the call. Kai zipped up his backpack, which contained his sketchbook, a set of expensive colored pencils, and a well-worn copy of Jane's All the World's Aircraft. He walked confidently to the gate, presented his boarding pass to the smiling agent, and strode down the jet bridge. The thrill was electric. He stepped into the cabin and was greeted by the serene, muted tones of the first-class section. He found his seat 2A, a spacious pod with its own entertainment screen and a lie-flat bed. He carefully stowed his backpack, took out his sketchbook and settled in, looking out the window at the bustling tarmac. He was so absorbed in the moment that he barely noticed the flight attendant moving through the cabin. Brenda Haskins had been with Apex Air for 22 years. She saw herself not as a service employee, but as the gatekeeper of the first-class experience. She prided herself on her ability to spot a non-rev passenger or a misplaced upgrade from a mile away. In her mind, first class was a delicate ecosystem, and she was its fierce protector. Over the years, her protective instinct had curdled into a bitter, judgmental cynicism. She had become an expert in microaggressions, delivered with a saccharine smile that was impossible to challenge without seeming overly sensitive. When she saw the small black child sitting alone in 2A, her internal alarms blared. He was neatly dressed in a polo shirt and chinos, but to her he looked out of place. He wasn't fidgeting with a tablet or being loud. He was quietly drawing. But her mind had already written a story, a mis-seated passenger from economy, a child who had wandered up from the back, or worse, someone trying to game the system. She glided over her smile, as tight and artificial as the plastic cabin walls. "Hello there, sweetie. Are you a little lost?" Kai looked up, startled. "No, ma'am. This is my seat." 2A. Brenda's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Oh, I'm sure you think so. But this is the first-class cabin. Your seat is probably further back. Can I see your boarding pass?" Her tone was condescending, laced with a cloying sweetness that made Kai's skin crawl. He'd been taught to be polite to adults, so he retrieved his boarding pass from his pocket and handed it to her. Brenda glanced at it. The name read Kai Merrick. The seat was clearly 2A. This only deepened her suspicion. An unaccompanied minor in first class with a different last name than the man in 2B, whose pass she had already noted was for a Robert Merrick. Her mind leaped to a conclusion, one steeped in a prejudice she would never admit to. "This is a very expensive seat, honey," she said, handing the pass back. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here? Who are you traveling with?" "My dad," Kai said, his voice shrinking. "He's on the phone. He's coming." Other passengers were beginning to notice the interaction. A man in 3C, a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair, lowered his newspaper. Brenda leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, it's okay if there's been a mistake. We can find your real seat for you. Let's not make a fuss. There's no mistake," Kai insisted, his cheeks flushing with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. He pointed to the empty seat beside him. "My dad is Robert Merrick. He's in 2B. Brenda's face twisted into a mask of disbelief. "That's not possible. I need you to come with me. We'll sort this out at the back of the plane." "But this is my seat." Panic began to set in for Kai. He felt the eyes of the other passengers on him. He felt like he had done something wrong, though he couldn't imagine what. "Now, young man," Brenda said, her voice losing its fake sweetness and taking on a steely edge. She put a hand on his arm. "We don't want to cause a scene and delay the flight, do we? Let's go." Tears welled in Kai's eyes. The humiliation was a physical weight. He didn't want to cause trouble. His father had told him to be good. So with his head down, he grabbed his backpack and let the flight attendant lead him away from his dream seat. He walked the longest walk of his life down the aisle, past the premium economy section, and into the cramped, bustling economy cabin. Brenda pointed to an empty middle seat in the last row next to the lavatories. "You can wait here for now," she said dismissively, before turning and marching back to her first-class domain, a sense of righteous order restored. Kai sank into the uncomfortable seat, the smell of disinfectant from the bathrooms already sharp in his nostrils. He hugged his backpack to his chest. The proud mission of boarding alone now a complete disaster. He buried his face in his arms, the tears finally coming silent and hot. Moments later, Robert Merrick concluded his call with a sigh of relief, the crisis averted. He slid his phone into his jacket pocket and walked briskly down the jet bridge. a smile on his face, eager to join his son and begin their adventure. He stepped into the cabin, his eyes immediately going to seats 2A and 2B. He saw his briefcase in 2B, where he'd left it. But seat 2A was empty. Kai was gone. A flicker of confusion, not yet alarm, passed through Robert. He scanned the first-class cabin. Maybe Kai had gone to the lavatory. He settled into his own seat, 2B, expecting his son to emerge any moment. He greeted the man in 3C with a polite nod. The man, whose name was Judge Franklin Miller, a retired federal judge, nodded back, his expression unreadable, but tinged with a look of concern. After a few minutes, there was still no sign of Kai. The cabin door was about to be closed. Now, a knot of unease began to tighten in Robert's stomach. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up just as Brenda Haskins approached with a tray of pre-departure drinks. "Can I get you some champagne or orange juice, sir?" she asked, her professional smile firmly in place. "I'm fine, thank you. I'm looking for my son." He was in seat 2A, Robert said, his voice calm and even. Brenda's smile didn't falter. "Oh, yes." "The little boy." There was a mix-up with his seating. "We've found him a temporary spot in the main cabin while we sort it out. We'll get everything squared away after takeoff." She made it sound like a minor routine logistical hiccup. Robert's eyes narrowed slightly. "A mix-up. His boarding pass says 2A. My boarding pass says 2B. We're traveling together. What exactly is there to sort out?" The directness of the question seemed to momentarily fluster Brenda. "Well, sir, it's just a matter of procedure. He's perfectly safe. Please take your seat so we can depart on time." Robert Merrick was not a man who was easily placated by procedural excuses. As the CEO of Aerovate Dynamics, a company that designed and manufactured the world's most advanced flight control and navigation systems currently installed on this very aircraft, he understood procedure on a level Brenda couldn't possibly fathom. He also understood people, and he could see the dismissive prejudice radiating from her. "I'd like you to bring my son back to his seat, please. Now." His voice was still quiet, but it had acquired a density, a weight that made the air around them feel heavy. Brenda's smile finally cracked, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Sir, I am the purser on this flight. I have made a decision based on the circumstances." The boy was unattended, and there was confusion about his ticket. "He will be brought back once we've verified everything." Before Robert could respond, Judge Miller in seat 3C cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man used to commanding a courtroom. "I couldn't help but overhear. There was no confusion. The boy showed you his boarding pass. It clearly said 2A. You then escorted him, an obviously distressed child, to the back of the aircraft. I saw the whole thing." Brenda shot a venomous glare at the judge before turning back to Robert, her demeanor shifting from dismissive to defensive. "Sir, I am responsible for the safety and comfort of everyone in this cabin. I am simply doing my job." "Your job?" Robert's voice was dangerously soft. "Your job is to assist passengers, not to humiliate a 10-year-old child. Where is my son?" The confrontation was drawing more attention. The lead pilot, Captain Mike Santoro, emerged from the cockpit, alerted to a delay in closing the cabin door. He was a veteran with a no-nonsense attitude, primarily concerned with his schedule. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, addressing Robert. Brenda spoke first. "Captain, this passenger is becoming disruptive. I had to reseat an unaccompanied child who appeared to be in the wrong section, and now his father is refusing to take his seat for departure. The word disruptive hung in the air. It was a loaded term, a tool that could be used to remove a passenger from a flight. Robert knew this. He took a deep, steadying breath. Losing his temper would only make him the villain in their narrative. "Captain Robert," said, turning to face him and ignoring Brenda completely. "My son Kai Merrick was ticketed for and seated in 2A. Your purser, for reasons she has yet to explain adequately, removed him from his seat and sent him to the economy cabin. I have asked for him to be returned, and she has refused. I will not be taking my seat until my son is sitting next to me in the seat I paid for." He spoke with precision, stripping the emotion from his voice and leaving only the hard, undeniable facts. Captain Santoro looked from Robert to Brenda, his face a mask of weary frustration. He just wanted to get his plane in the air. "Brenda, for God's sake, just go get the kid. Let's sort it out in the air." Brenda's face flushed with indignation. Being overruled in front of the passengers was a deep humiliation. "Captain, with all due respect, my assessment was—" "I don't care about your assessment." Santoro cut her off. "Go get the boy, now!" Fuming, Brenda turned and stomped down the aisle. A few minutes later, she returned with Kai trailing miserably behind her. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he clutched his sketchbook to his chest like a shield. He wouldn't look at anyone. Robert's heart broke. He knelt down to Kai's level, his voice softening completely. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" Kai just nodded, unable to speak, and quickly slid into seat 2A, curling up against the window. Robert stood up and looked at Brenda, then at the captain. The entire first-class cabin was silent, watching. "The issue is resolved," Captain Santoro said, a hint of impatience in his tone. "Now, sir, please take your seat." Robert looked at his son, then back at the crew. He could sit down. He could let it go. He could fly to Los Angeles and file a strongly worded complaint later. But as he looked at Kai's slumped shoulders, he knew that wasn't an option. This wasn't about a seating mistake anymore. This was about the casual, cruel exercise of power over a child. It was about an employee, and by extension, a company that saw his son not as a valued customer, but as a problem to be managed. He made a decision. "No," Robert said quietly. The captain blinked. "No." "What do you mean, no?" "We won't be flying with you today," Robert stated. "My son and I will be deplaning." He then looked directly at Brenda Haskins, his eyes as cold and clear as ice. "You should have checked the passenger manifest more carefully. It wasn't a threat, but a statement of fact. A promise of what was to come." He turned to the captain. "Please open the door. We're leaving." Captain Santoro was stunned. Delaying a flight for a confrontation was one thing. A first-class passenger voluntarily deplaning over a service issue was almost unheard of. It meant paperwork. It meant reports. It meant a guaranteed complaint to corporate. But the man was resolute. "Fine," Santoro snapped. "Open the door." Robert gently touched Kai's shoulder. "Come on, champ. We're going to take a different plane." Without a word, a bewildered but relieved Kai grabbed his backpack. Robert collected his briefcase. As they walked towards the open door, Judge Miller from 3C caught Robert's eye. He held up his business card. "Robert Merrick," the judge said, introducing himself as he handed over the card. "Franklin Miller. I'm a witness to what just happened. If you need a statement, don't hesitate to call. What that woman did was an absolute disgrace. Thank you, Judge Miller. I appreciate that, Robert said, pocketing the card. He and Kai stepped off the plane, leaving behind a cabin buzzing with whispers and a flight attendant who, in her arrogant ignorance, had just lit a fuse on a bomb she didn't even know existed. Back in the hushed sanctuary of the Apex Air flagship lounge, the atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. The lounge agent who had readmitted them had been apologetic but clueless, offering them complimentary snacks and magazines, as if this were a simple misconnection. Kai sat quietly in a large leather armchair, his sketchbook open, but his pencil still. The vibrant energy he'd had before boarding was gone, replaced by a quiet, wounded listlessness. Robert's heart ached for his son, but his mind was already shifting gears. The father was receding, and the CEO was taking over. His anger was no longer a hot emotional flame. It was a cold, blue-white fire, focused and intensely dangerous. He wasn't just going to file a complaint. He was going to recalibrate the entire airline. He sat opposite Kai and pulled out his phone. He didn't dial the 1-800 customer service number. He didn't look up a corporate contact. He scrolled to a private number in his contacts list under the name Jeffrey Langdon. Jeffrey Langdon was the CEO of Apex Air. The two men moved in similar circles of corporate power, having met at various aviation industry conferences and charity galas. They weren't friends, but they were familiar part of the same exclusive club of executives who shaped global travel and technology. Robert pressed the call button. It rang twice before Langdon answered, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "Robert, what a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Jeffrey Robert began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I'm calling you from your flagship lounge at JFK. Oh, passing through, are you? I hope my people are taking good care of you." "That's why I'm calling, Robert," said the ice in his tone becoming unmistakable. "I was just on your flight 712 to Los Angeles, in seat 2B. My 10-year-old son, Kai, was in 2A. He then proceeded to recount the events of the last hour with chilling, lawyerly precision. He described Brenda Haskins's condescending tone, her refusal to check the boarding pass properly, her baseless accusation, and the public humiliation of his son being marched to the back of the plane. He mentioned Judge Miller by name, noting that he had a credible witness. As he spoke, he could almost hear the corporate smile draining from Langdon's voice. "And so my son and I deplaned," Robert concluded. "We are no longer flying on Apex Air. Not today. Not ever again." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Langdon was processing, calculating. An angry VIP was a problem, but a manageable one. "Robert, I am appalled," Langdon said, his voice dripping with synthetic sincerity. "Absolutely horrified. This is not what Apex Air stands for. This flight attendant, Brenda Haskins, you said her behavior is inexcusable. I will personally see to it that she is reprimanded in the strongest possible terms. Please let me arrange for our top concierge to rebook you on the next flight, and of course the entire trip will be on us. I'll throw in 100,000 bonus miles for your trouble." Robert cut him off. "Jeffrey, stop. Do you think this is about free flights? Do you think a few bonus miles will erase the fact that your employee made my son feel like a criminal because of the color of his skin?" The accusation, now stated so plainly, hung in the air. Langdon started to backpedal. "Now, Robert, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure the attendant was simply confused, perhaps overzealous in her duties. Overzealous, Robert's voice was like a chip of ice. She looked at a black child in first class, and her first unshakable assumption was that he didn't belong there. That isn't overzealousness, Geoffrey. That's a deep-seated bias, a bias you are apparently cultivating in your senior staff. That is an unfair accusation, Langdon blustered. Is it? Robert countered. Let me be very clear about what's going to happen next. This is not a negotiation. These are my terms. First, I want Brenda Haskins terminated. Not suspended, not retrained, not transferred. Fired, effective immediately. Second, I want a full public apology from you as CEO of Apex Air, not just to my son, but to the wider community, for the culture of prejudice this incident has exposed within your airline. Langdon was silent, likely stunned by the audacity. And third, Robert continued delivering the killing blow. You are going to announce a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of your company's diversity, equity, and inclusion training to be overseen and audited by an independent third-party firm of my choosing. Langdon finally found his voice, a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Robert, you can't be serious. You're a passenger. You don't get to dictate my company's HR policies and corporate strategy because of one unfortunate incident. This was the moment Robert had been waiting for. The moment Langdon revealed he still didn't understand who he was talking to. Geoffrey, you seem to be under a misapprehension, Robert said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You think I'm just a passenger. You're forgetting who I am. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I am the CEO of Aerovate Dynamics. My company designs, manufactures, and maintains the flight control software, the navigation systems, and the collision avoidance technology for your entire fleet of Boeing 787s and Airbus A350s. That includes the plane I just walked off of. The silence on the other end was now absolute deafening. Robert could picture Langdon in his corner office, the blood draining from his face. The operational integrity of our systems, Robert continued, is critically dependent on the human factor interface. That means the pilots and crew who operate them must be reliable, stable, and free from compromised judgment. A crew member who makes critical decisions based on racial bias is by definition a compromised and unreliable human factor. She is a safety risk. He let that sink in. So here is what is going to happen. You have until 9 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow morning to meet my 3 terms. If you do not, Aerovate Dynamics will be forced to issue a formal service integrity notice to Apex Air. We will initiate a Level 1 mandatory safety and compliance review of all our technology currently installed on your aircraft, citing concerns over unreliable crew performance and its potential impact on avionics safety protocols. Such a review would require our engineers to have physical access to every single one of your long-haul aircraft for diagnostics. Your entire transcontinental and international fleet would be for all intents and purposes grounded, indefinitely. He had weaponized the jargon of his industry, turning a corporate buzzword into a dagger aimed at the heart of Apex Air. He wasn't just an angry father anymore. He was a critical supplier threatening to shut down his biggest client. He was in effect holding the power to ground the airline. You're bluffing, Langdon stammered, but there was no conviction in his voice. Am I? Robert asked softly. Look at your stock price tomorrow at 9:01 a.m. and find out. The choice is yours, Geoffrey. Fix the cancer in your company, or I will. Goodbye. He ended the call. The silence in the lounge returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a chessboard after a checkmate. Robert looked over at Kai, who had finally picked up a pencil and was sketching the wing of a plane. A small, resilient smile touched Robert's lips. The battle was just beginning, but he had already chosen the battlefield, and it was one where he could not lose. In his sprawling corner office on the 50th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, Jeffrey Langdon stared at his phone as if it were a venomous snake. The dial tone hummed in his ear, a flat mocking sound, grounded. The word echoed in the opulent silence of his office. It was preposterous. It was blackmail. It was terrifyingly credible. His first instinct was pure, unadulterated fury. Who the hell did Robert Merrick think he was? Langdon was the CEO of a legacy airline, a titan of industry. He wouldn't be bullied. He buzzed his executive assistant. "Get me Frank Vogel in legal and Maria Flores in per conference call, now." Within minutes, 2 of his most senior executives were on the line. Langdon, pacing his office with a view of Lake Michigan he wasn't seeing, recounted the conversation with Robert Merrick, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "And then he threatens to ground my fleet. My entire long-haul operation. Citing some trumped-up human factor nonsense. It's corporate extortion." Frank Vogel, the airline's chief counsel, a man paid a fortune to be pragmatic and cautious, spoke first. "Jeffrey, is Robert Merrick's company, Aerovate, as integral to our fleet as he claims?" "They're critical." Langdon spat. "They handle the brains of the damned planes. The 787s and A350s can't fly without their certified systems. A service integrity notice. God, the FAA would be all over us. We'd have to comply. It would be a catastrophe. He'd bring us to our knees." Maria Flores, the sharp, unflappable head of public relations, chimed in. "Okay, let's leave the technical threat aside for a moment. Let's talk about the story. A father and his 10-year-old black son kicked out of first class. The father happens to be a fellow CEO. There was a witness, a retired federal judge. Jeffrey, this is not a story we can win. It's a nuclear-level PR crisis waiting to happen." "So what do we do?" Langdon demanded. "We can't just cave to these insane demands. Firing an employee based on a customer complaint. Setting a precedent like that. We need to investigate," Frank said, falling back on standard corporate procedure. "Pull the employee's file. Get statements from the rest of the crew. See if there are other passenger accounts." "Do it," Langdon ordered. "And get me everything you can on this flight attendant, Brenda Haskins. I want to know if she's ever sneezed without permission." The corporate machinery of Apex Air, vast and ponderous, began to grind into motion. An urgent request shot from the executive floor down to human resources. A digital file dormant for years, except for routine updates, was pulled from the server. An hour later, a grim-faced Frank Vogel was back on the line with Langdon. "Jeffrey, we have a problem," Vogel said, his voice low. "A significant one. What is it Brenda Haskins is not a model employee? Over the past 5 years, she's had 7 formal passenger complaints filed against her. 3 of them specifically allege rude or discriminatory behavior towards minority passengers." Langdon felt a cold dread creep up his spine. And what was done about them? "Standard procedure." Vogel sighed. A note was placed in her file. She was sent a memo reminding her of company policy. In one case, she attended a 2-hour online sensitivity training module. The union protected her from any real disciplinary action. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. They hadn't just had one unfortunate incident. They had a pattern. They had a history of negligence. They had harbored a problem employee, and she had finally detonated on the one passenger on Earth who could hold the entire company hostage. As if on cue, Maria Flores joined the call, her voice tight with urgency. "Jeffrey, it's starting. There's a tweet from a man named Franklin Miller. He's live tweeting his experience on Flight 712. He's described the whole incident. He's not a blue-check celebrity, but his bio reads, 'Retired U.S. federal judge.' It's being retweeted by lawyers, journalists. It's gaining traction. Fast." Langdon felt the walls of his office closing in. The story was out. The witness was credible. Their employee had a record, and a man with the power to cripple his airline was waiting for his call, holding a stopwatch. "What about Merrick?" Langdon asked, his voice now strained. "Is he just sitting there?" "Worse," Maria said. "He's lawyered up. I got a call a few minutes ago from Samantha Reyes at the law firm Wachtell Lipton. She's representing Mr. Merrick. She politely informed me that all future communication should go through her and reiterated her client's terms and the 9 a.m. deadline. This isn't just an angry dad, Jeffrey. This is a coordinated corporate assault." The arrogance and fury Langdon had felt an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by the icy grip of panic. His initial strategy stall, offer compensation and protect the employee, was now utterly unviable. Merrick had outmaneuvered him at every turn. He hadn't just identified a problem, he had exposed a systemic rot within Apex Air, and he had the leverage to force a cure. Langdon sank into his chair, the skyline of Chicago looking suddenly ominous. He had a choice to make. He could fight stand on principle, defend his employee and his company's procedures. That path led to a PR nightmare, a stock market collapse, and a fleet of very expensive, very stationary airplanes. The media would crucify them. Merrick would be hailed as a hero, a father fighting for justice. Or he could surrender. He could swallow his pride fire, a 22-year veteran employee issue, a groveling public apology, and hand over control of his company's training policies to an outsider. It was humiliating. It was unprecedented. But the planes would still fly. "Get me a draft of a public apology," he said to Maria, his voice a dead monotone. "Frank, start the termination paperwork for Ms. Haskins. And find me the best damn independent DEI consulting firm in the country. It seems Mr. Merrick is about to get everything he wants." The scramble was over. The battle had been lost before he even knew he was at war. All that was left was the unconditional surrender. While Jeffrey Langdon and his team were capitulating in their Chicago high-rise, the story was escaping the confines of Twitter and metastasizing into a full-blown media firestorm. Judge Miller's measured but damning tweets had acted as the initial kindling. But then gasoline was thrown on the fire. A passenger in the premium economy cabin, a college student named Chloe Jenkins, who was on her way to a film internship, had seen the whole thing. She had seen the small boy being led down the aisle, his face streaked with tears. She had seen the imperious flight attendant, and with the instincts of a budding documentarian, she had discreetly filmed the confrontation between Robert Merrick and the flight crew on her phone. The video was shaky, the audio slightly muffled by the cabin noise, but it was utterly devastating. It captured Robert's quiet, controlled anger. It captured Captain Santoro's dismissiveness. And most damningly, it captured Brenda Haskins' defiant, condescending attitude. Chloe hesitated for a few hours, unsure if she should post it. But after seeing Judge Miller's tweets and realizing the gravity of the situation, she uploaded it with the hashtags Apex Air, Shame, Ashram flying while black and Nash justice Forkai. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. Within 3 hours, the video had 1 million views. By morning, it was over 50 million. It led every news broadcast. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. For once, they were all telling the same story. The clip played on a loop a powerful, well-dressed black man, calmly defending his child against a system that refused to see him as anything other than an inconvenience. The court of public opinion delivered its verdict swiftly and brutally. Brenda Haskins became the face of corporate prejudice, a Karen of the skies. Apex Air was cast as the villain, a soulless corporation enabling bigotry at 35,000 feet. Memes were created. Boycotts were organized. Celebrities weighed in, sharing their own stories of discrimination. The hashtags trended globally for 2 days straight. For Apex Air, the financial impact was catastrophic. When the stock market opened at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, their stock APX didn't just dip, it plummeted. It fell 15% in the first hour of trading, wiping out over $1 billion of market capitalization. The phones in their booking centers went silent, while the lines for cancellations were overwhelmed. Jeffrey Langdon watched the carnage unfold from his office, feeling utterly helpless. He had already decided to surrender, but the public flogging was more severe than he could have ever imagined. He had thought he could control the narrative with a carefully worded apology. Now he was just a man trying to patch a hole in a dam that had already burst. At precisely 9:01 a.m., as promised, the final blow landed. Aerovate Dynamics issued a formal press release. It was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, written by Robert's PR chief Mark Chen and vetted by his lawyer Samantha Reyes. The release didn't mention Flight 712. It didn't mention Kai or Brenda Haskins. It was cold, clinical, and terrifying. Aerovate Dynamics has today issued a service integrity notice to Apex Air. This notice follows a recent incident that has raised significant concerns regarding human factor reliability and judgment within the airline's senior cabin crew. The consistent and safe operation of our advanced avionics systems is paramount and can be compromised by unpredictable crew behavior. Therefore, Aerovate will be immediately launching a comprehensive, fleet-wide safety and compliance review of our technology installed on all Apex Air long-haul aircraft. This review is essential to ensure that our systems are not being operated under conditions that could introduce unacceptable risk. The statement was a kill shot. To the average person, it might have sounded like technical jargon. But to the FAA, to airline investors, and to every other airline in the world, the message was brutally clear. Aerovate believes Apex Air's crew is a flight risk. It was the corporate equivalent of a public shaming. The grounding that Robert had threatened was no longer just a private ultimatum. It was now a public declaration of no confidence from their most critical technology partner. Apex Air was not just morally bankrupt in the public eye. They were now potentially unsafe in the eyes of the industry. Langdon's phone rang. It was the chairman of the Apex Air board of directors. His voice was apoplectic. "Jeffrey, what in God's name is this Aerovate press release? Our stock is in freefall. The FAA just called me." "They're launching a formal inquiry. You have to fix this." "Now I'm handling it," Langdon said, his voice hollow. "Handling it. It looks like you've let a disgruntled passenger burn our company to the ground." Langdon knew his own job was now on the line. The crisis had spiraled far beyond a single flight attendant. It was about the survival of the airline's reputation and his own career. He hung up the phone and looked at the apology his team had drafted. It was a weak, meandering mess of corporate speak about valuing all customers and falling short of our ideals. It was useless. He deleted the entire document. He knew what he had to do. He had to face Robert Merrick in person. He had to beg. The terms were no longer up for discussion. His only goal now was to convince Robert to publicly call off his dogs before there was nothing left of Apex Air to save. The grounding was no longer a threat. It was a reality playing out in real time on stock tickers and news channels across the world. Brenda Haskins landed in Los Angeles, feeling vindicated. The deplaning of the Merricks had been an annoyance, a disruption to her carefully managed cabin, but in her mind, she had been in the right. She had followed her instincts. She had protected the sanctity of first class. When she filed her post-flight report, she framed the incident as dealing with a non-compliant and disruptive passenger and his mis-seated child. She slept soundly in her hotel room near LAX, confident the union would back her as they always had. She woke up to a world that was on fire with her at the center of the inferno. Her phone had exploded with notifications. A text from her station manager simply said, "Call me urgently." A link from a fellow flight attendant sent her to Chloe Jenkins's viral video. She watched it, her blood running cold. The shaky footage, the distorted sound, it didn't matter. The video cast her as a villain. It stripped away all context, all her years of service, all her justifications, and left only the raw, ugly image of a white woman in a position of authority condescending to a black father and making his child cry. She saw the comments, tens of thousands of them. "Racist hag. Fire her immediately. I hope she never works again." Her address, gleaned from a data broker site, had been posted in a sub-thread. People were calling for her to be doxxed, fired and shamed for the rest of her life. Panic set in. This wasn't a standard complaint that would be buried in her file. This was a public execution. She called her union representative a jaded, world-weary man named Bill. "Brenda, you've really stepped in it this time," he said, his voice heavy. "They're twisting it, Bill." She insisted, her voice shrill with desperation. The boy was unattended. "I thought there was a mistake. And the father, he was aggressive. The video shows him being calmer than a Buddhist monk." "Brenda, and the unattended boy is the son of Robert Merrick, who the CEO of Aerovate Dynamics, the company that makes half the damn parts on our planes. You didn't just annoy a passenger, Brenda. You picked a fight with the man who supplies the engines." Bill's analogy was technically incorrect, but emotionally spot on. The official call from Apex Air HR came an hour later. She was suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full investigation. She was instructed not to speak to the media. But Brenda, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and self-righteousness, couldn't stay silent. She felt she was the victim. She believed her side of the story needed to be heard. Against the advice of her union rep, she agreed to an interview with a controversial cable news host known for championing the cancelled. It was a complete and utter disaster. On national television, she tried to portray herself as a diligent employee, just trying to do her job. "In my 22 years of service," she began, her voice quivering with practiced sincerity, "my only priority has been the safety and comfort of my passengers. When I see a situation that doesn't seem right, I have a duty to act." The host, trying to help her, asked, "So you saw a young child alone in first class, and you were concerned?" "Exactly," Brenda said, relieved. "It's a very expensive ticket." He seemed lost. "I was just trying to help him find his family." The host pressed on. "But why did you assume he didn't belong? even after he told you his father was coming." Brenda hesitated, and in that moment her real prejudices surfaced. "Well, you know, it's just not. It's not a common sight. I had to be sure. I was protecting the integrity of the cabin. The phrase 'not a common sight' was all it took. The backlash was immediate. She wasn't just a mistaken employee. She was an admitted bigot. Worse was to come. Emboldened by the public outcry, her former colleagues and other passengers began to speak out. An anonymous source within Apex Air leaked her history of complaints to a major newspaper. The stories were damning. The time she'd asked a Sikh man in a turban if he was feeling okay because he looked hot in his hat. The time she'd told a Latino family their children were being too loud and ethnic. The time she accused a black woman in a designer tracksuit of stealing from the duty-free cart. The pattern was undeniable. Brenda Haskins wasn't a victim of cancel culture. She was a serial offender who had finally run out of chances. The final crushing blow came from the company to which she had dedicated half her life. 2 days after the interview, she received a termination letter via courier. It was cold, formal, and cited gross misconduct and behavior that has caused irreparable damage to the company's brand and reputation. Her career was over. She tried to fight it, but the union, facing immense pressure and seeing an unwinnable case, quietly distanced themselves. Her friends stopped returning her calls. Recognized in the grocery store, she was met with hostile glares and muttered insults. She had become a pariah. The hard karma had hit. Brenda Haskins hadn't just lost her job. She had lost her identity. The uniform she wore with such pride was gone. The authority she wielded in the cabin had vanished. All that was left was the viral video, a permanent digital stain, and the crushing realization that the one time she had chosen to enforce her own prejudiced view of the world, it had cost her everything. She was grounded permanently. Jeffrey Langdon's flight to New York was the most stressful journey of his life. He flew on a rival airline, unable to bear the thought of facing his own demoralized crew. He wasn't flying as a CEO. He was flying as a penitent, on his way to beg for his company's life. The meeting was held not in a sterile boardroom, but in a private suite at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel overlooking Central Park. Robert Merrick was there, not alone, but flanked by his lawyer, Samantha Reyes. Kai was not present. Robert had shielded him from the corporate fallout, sending him to spend time with his cousins. This was business. Langdon entered the room, his expensive suit feeling like a costume. He had a prepared speech full of apologies and action plans. Robert held up a hand, stopping him before he could begin. "Jeffrey saved the speech," Robert said, his voice even. "I don't need to hear your apologies. My son does. But since he's not here, the only thing I'm interested in is action. Tell me what you have done and what you are going to do." Humbled Langdon abandoned his script. He laid out the facts. Brenda Haskins has been terminated. Her history of complaints is being investigated by our legal team to see where our internal processes failed. I have a draft of a public apology that I will read at a press conference this afternoon. In it, I will apologize directly to your son by name and to the public for our institutional failures. He slid a folder across the table. This is a list of the top 3 diversity and inclusion consulting firms in the nation. We are prepared to sign a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract with whichever one you choose. They will have full authority to audit our hiring, training, and promotion practices and implement a new curriculum for every single employee, starting with me. Robert listened, his face betraying no emotion. Samantha Reyes reviewed the documents, nodding occasionally. "It's a start," Robert said, when Langdon finished. "But it's not enough. People will see this as a reactive, temporary fix. A PR stunt to save your stock price. I'm not interested in a temporary fix." Langdon's heart sank. "What more can we do?" "You are going to become the industry leader in this," Robert stated. "You're not just going to fix your problem. You're going to set a new standard." Aerovate Dynamics is establishing a new division, the Human Factors Assurance Program. We will work with your chosen DEI firm to develop a new generation of training using data analytics and simulation technology, my technology to identify and mitigate implicit bias in flight crews. We will use the events of Flight 712 as our core case study. And Apex Air will be our founding partner. You will pilot this program, and you will pay for it. You will publicly champion it. You will turn your greatest shame into your greatest strength. It was a brilliant move. It wasn't just punishment. It was a constructive, long-term solution that also happened to tie Apex Air's future to Robert's company. It gave Robert oversight and turned his personal victory into a systemic, industry-wide change. Langdon looked at the man across from him. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a visionary, a strategist of the highest order. He had taken a moment of deep personal pain and leveraged it to reshape an entire industry. Yes, Langdon said the single word, a complete capitulation and the beginning of a new chapter. We will. That afternoon, Jeffrey Langdon stood before a wall of cameras and delivered the most humble, sincere speech of his life. He announced the termination, the new partnership, and the airline's commitment to change. Following the press conference, Aerovate Dynamics issued a second statement, announcing their partnership with Apex Air on the new Human Factors Assurance Program, and formally retracting the service integrity notice. The market responded. By the end of the week, Apex Air's stock had stabilized and begun a slow climb back. The bleeding had stopped. A week later, Robert Merrick and his son Kai stood on the tarmac of a private airfield. In front of them was a sleek Gulfstream G650, chartered for their rescheduled trip to Los Angeles. "Ready to fly?" Champ Robert asked, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Kai nodded, his eyes bright again. In his hands he held his sketchbook. He opened it to a new page where he had drawn a detailed, complex diagram. It wasn't a plane. It was a flow chart. At the top it said, "How to make airlines better." It showed boxes for better training, fair rules, and listen to kids. Robert smiled, his heart swelling with a pride that had nothing to do with stock prices or corporate victories. His son hadn't been broken by the incident. He had been inspired. He was already trying to solve the problem. As they boarded the private jet, leaving the noise and the anger of the past week behind them, Robert knew the fight had been worth it. He hadn't just grounded an airline for a day. He had set it on a new course, and flying beside him, gazing out the window at the endless blue sky, was the future engineer who would one day design the planes that would fly on that better, more equitable course. The journey was finally truly beginning. This wasn't just a story about a viral video or a corporate takedown. It was a testament to a father's love and the quiet, unshakable power of dignity in the face of bigotry. Robert Merrick didn't need to raise his voice. He raised the stakes. He demonstrated that true strength isn't about humiliating those who wrong you, but about holding them accountable and forcing systemic change that benefits everyone. Brenda Haskins and Apex Air learned a hard lesson. A single act of prejudice in today's world can carry a cost far greater than a stock drop. It can cost you your reputation, your career, and your moral compass. Robert turned a moment of personal injustice into a catalyst for an entire industry's evolution. "What do you think?" was Robert's response. The perfect blend of fatherly protection and corporate power, or did he go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story of karma and accountability compelling, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories where justice is served.